Well, Richard, it's pretty good to actually catch up with you again. I'd have to say, it's getting a bit hot, I might take off my hat. Without any doubt, you're certainly one of the more different architects that I've ever met. You're one of the more left field architects. Now, I had the word weird in there, but I thought, maybe that's not looking the right, because your work is actually beautiful. And it's not just Melbourne based. A lot of people would know you for some Melbourne projects, Chastleton House, and one in particular that we're going to talk about today, MAXWELL House. But you're also known for Los Palos in East Timor, which was a beautiful cultural centre. So welcome, Richard, and thank you very much for coming along to this podcast.
It's really exciting to be here with you, Mel. I think I've always appreciated the advice you've given me over the years. I think you're one of the first people I sat down with when I started my business and sort of really set me straight about what it was to be a good architect. So it's good to pay the favour back and be here today.
Setting you straight about what a good architect is.
I don't
know if I can set anybody straight about what a good thing is. So yeah, we met about. I
think it was 8 years ago.
It's more than that. It's more than that, definitely. So over a decade, because I think we did anyway. And you came from the banana state, the pineapple state.
Yeah, just come from Queensland.
That's right.
Where I've been working for a couple of years on tropical houses, and I sort of moved back and started my own practice. And I think you were one of the first people I sat down with when we were working on the MAXWELL house. That was our first big project.
Well, before that, you rang me up and you came round and you wanted to have a coffee and sit down and have a talk, and you showed me some of your designs, and
you said, I'm going to get nowhere, they're too weird.
Yeah, I think I did. It does come back to that word weird, doesn't it? Anyway, but we did get along.
Yeah,
we got along really well, and I could see some magic in what you were doing there. And then we met, we ran into a mutual client. He's a very private man, or they're a very private family. So let's just call them, or him, let's call him the Energizer Bunny, because that's exactly what he is. And he was full on, and I know he was going through the stage. We bought this particular home, and we'll talk about that in a little while. And they were going through considering architects, and I remember really crystal clear in coming to me and goes, "So, what do you think about Richard? Do you reckon he's the right? Do you reckon he's the guy?" And I don't know if I'm whatever. I just said yes. He's the man. Maybe that's because the client, the Energizer Bunny's a little bit left field and weird too. But I just thought it was a perfect match. But anyway, enough about me. This is more about you. Let me ask you a couple of quick questions, just to sort of get going and to set the scene. Where did you get that name from? Because you're Richard Blight from Blight, and Blight. So where did Blight, and Blight come from?
I think that's one of the things you told me from the beginning, to change the name of my company. Part of the reason we named it, I named it that company, is I think when you've got a last name like Blight, it's not great to call yourself Blight Architects.
Yeah.
But if you say it 3 times, it doesn't sound so bad. So I think it was a bit of a joke, and it was also to sort of, I guess, demarcate ourselves. It's definitely something people don't forget.
Yeah.
But most importantly, it was sort of just to make a bit of a statement that we weren't going to do things the same as everyone else, and we didn't take ourselves too seriously. I wouldn't say weird, but we definitely look at things from we're not sort of restricted by convention.
You do, and on that note, I know you did a little drawing for us at my request, and thank you very much for the property we just sold in Gorworth in TOORAK, and we needed to be able to show the clients, and we only had a very few potential clients. We only had a very small number of people come through, but there were some difficulties with that site. But there were some really magical things about that site, and the one single concept that you came up with, that curving driveway around the side, which could also be a curving walkway, and it was purely just for design purposes and to make people think. But that was just brilliant. I mean, I don't know how you came up with it, because it's not obvious. But how long have you been an architect, and why are you an architect?
I feel like I was an architect because maybe I wasn't very good at anything else. But
that's why I'm a real estate agent.
That's what people say.
Yeah.
Some people say you're not even very good at that.
Yeah, that's true.
I know. So my practice has been going for maybe 6 to 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
I started a long time ago. I think I've been since I graduated was sort of 18 to 20 years ago, to give my age, and when I had a lot more hair and a lot more energy. And now with 2 kids later.
2 kids, married.
Yeah, married with 2 kids. The practice is still going. I mean, our relationship with Flax Studio has become a lot closer, and we're doing...
Flax Studio's the interior design company.
So with those 2 companies are sort of coming closer and closer.
Well, they're pretty lowbrow, aren't they? Yeah. Flax Studios. Well, Flax Studios, they don't get out of bed for less than $1 million in the morning. It might be a bit unfair, but geez, that's certainly high end. Yep.
Yeah, so we have a really close work relationship with them. So the business has really grown and sort of developed. I mean, from that first MAXWELL Court practice project, now we've got more and more work in that sort of space, and we're expanding into different types of projects, and finding a bit of a sweet spot. I think we're quite well known for tricky sites.
I think you are.
High yield. So
tell us a bit more about your family then.
So we live in the conservative Malvern East. We're sort of probably, I think I'm the only one of 2 architects that live in Malvern East. It's not considered very hip, but we love it. Just around near Central Park.
Yep.
It's a lovely part of the world.
Near the Gascoigne.
Yeah. The kids go to Malvern Primary. We live a pretty boring life. We sort of go to the same places everyone goes on holidays. When you've got young kids, you know.
Okay, so what back into a little bit of work then. What's your sort of biggest project that you've been involved in, and what's your most challenging, do you think?
I think in terms of houses, we're sort of starting to hit the sort of $5 to $10 million mark pretty sort of consistently.
That's from an architectural building point of view, but that may well be a $20 or $30 million home. Just to put it. Yep.
So bigger projects with along with FLAC, which are a lot more high end and a lot more detail. We really like working with high end interior designers. We think that marriage between architecture and interior design is really important. But I guess the most challenging project, I mean, every project, I think it's how much you care, really. I think we sort of see every project as a challenge because we're always looking for the
every client's a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good thing about, I think, if you can we like to take that on, the eccentricities of people. Like, we don't, as architects, see ourselves as sort of coming in to sort of like stylise people or set them on track in terms of how fashionable they need to be. We're very much coming along to the projects and trying to understand what's amazing about that person, and then develop a project which really just sort of like facilitates a way of living which meets their aspirations and the type of people they are. So every project's very customised. So it's a real challenge to do that with some clients and fit that within a budget and make the most of a site, but it's a real privilege.
Yep. Okay, so last question about yourself. So your biggest indulgence outside work and family, and don't come back with some boring answer. You can't tell me that you don't have some form of indulgence.
Oh, if you ask my wife, we recently went to remortgage our house, went through our costs and what we spent money on, and my biggest expenditure was coffee and lunch. So I'm well known as Richie likes a lunch. So my biggest indulgence is probably the price of a small European car a year. The amount of money I spend on coffees, lunch, and Danishes, which has probably corrupted my daughter, who's a bit who refuses to go out for a walk unless there's a treat at the end of
understand that. So let's get down to business. Let's talk about architecture, and let's talk about, in particular, architectural relationships. The relationship between the architect and the client in particular, the relationship between architect and builders, the relationship between architect and whoever else is involved in the project. I'd like to really focus in on the one property, the property that we've had some experience together, as I said, MAXWELL House, MAXWELL Court in TOORAK. We bought the property, you designed the property with a leading architect. There are a number of other people involved we'll go through in a sec, and then we resold with Marcus the actual property. So we've been through all that together, and I think it'd be really good if we just focused in on just keeping everything in and around that one project. So clients can work out, or potential clients for you and for anybody else can work out what's involved in the architectural practice. So let me give you a quick fact sheet just to remind you a little bit about the property at which we'll call MAXWELL House at MAXWELL Court in TOORAK. So the architect was yourself, interior was Flax Studios, the builder was Leone Constructions, landscape was Florian Wide. You did win a number of awards, or you were shortlisted on a few awards in addition, and we can discuss them later. Land size is 777 square metres, so in no way is this a big block of land. In fact, the best way I think we could describe MAXWELL House was it's positioned as it's a difficult block. Yeah. It's quite a difficult block. It's multi-angles. There's a huge drain running, quite deeply beneath it.
Yep.
It's also because of its angles and that the spatial planning that you had to do in relation to working through light, to working out how you're going to maximise that site, I believe would have been quite difficult.
Yeah.
And so therefore, in my mind, this represents a really good thing to sort of talk about. So maybe I should just start off with a little bit of background. What sort of awards have you won for this particular building now it has been finished and resold?
It was the project itself was published we had a feature published in Bell, which was a great thing for us and for Flax Studio. I think we were shortlisted for 2 interior design awards, which was really amazing. But I think it set some records in TOORAK in terms of resale as well.
It did.
Which we really we were proud of, because it was a big investment in terms of us. We hadn't really ever done a project in TOORAK before, so it was a risk. So to sort of be able to do such a high quality project and to win awards and to get a good resale for your client was for us was great. We felt like we really paid back. It was important to us to pay back the privilege of being able to be given that opportunity.
So it was bought for the block of land, 777 square metres. It was bought for $4 million in 2014, I think it was, something in that sort of range. So $4 million, close enough to $4 million. It resold for $14.5 million a bit over a year ago. So that's a substantial increase. What was the actual build cost involved?
I think in
there?
the end it was 4.9, I think, and it didn't include FF&E, so there was furniture and artwork.
So if you allow for a reasonable growth factor for the block of land, you put in the costs of that. There's still a substantial improvement on the overall money spent, and that does in a lot of ways come down to the client. And their bravery in going ahead, the architect and the builder, etc. A little bit about the agents, but not too much. And so that's a pretty impressive result. Let's go back to the beginning.
Yep.
How did you get the job?
I think through a family connection. I think it's interesting the way we got the project and the way we started the project is something now that we're doing more and more, and we're seeing more and more, where we're engaged to work with the client to find a block. So they had 5 or 6 blocks, and I think you're involved in that process as well too. Mm-hmm. And in each block we produced a feasibility scheme in which the client could see the potential, and then they asked us from an architectural perspective what we thought, and then we led them to Maxwell Court. And I think Maxwell Court was the most difficult site that he could possibly find.
It was. I mean, I'm probably telling a story against both of us, and that shows the power of the client, because you were probably and I was probably and the client was, no, let's go for it. And so obviously, and we'll call him the Energizer Bunny. He had a vision. What was his vision, do you think? And in any way was your vision initially different from that, or did he change? Did you change, or were you always at one in terms of the vision?
I think it obviously with every client it took us a bit of time to understand the character of the client. I think one of the things which is quite good about Maxwell Court and that we're proud of is that sort of did make a good yield in terms of resale, but it was never designed for that purposes. It was a really custom, bespoke house that was built for that particular.
I think the Energizer Bunny might have had one eye on the resale.
I think he didn't tell us that.
He might have told me that.
Well, I mean, I think maybe everyone in TOORAK is. I mean, it's such a massive investment of money that there is an awareness from a resale perspective, and it's such a challenging site that the opportunities weren't enormous. So we really nailed in on a few sort of architectural moves that made it what it was. And I think it's 770 square metres, but it's almost like a
777.
777, but it's almost like a 680 square metre house for a pretty efficient price. But if you ever go there, it doesn't feel like you're on a block that size.
I agree.
It feels enormous.
That's the the beauty of your design. What about the overall process before we even sort of started hanging, hitting pegs into the ground and doing any shoveling? How long did that process take?
I think there were a few issues with the front setback, so it had to go into planning for a few issues around the front. But I think the initial design process for stage one was about 3 to 4 months,
Yep.
which is a bit longer than it normally takes, but it was enough time to sort of get it right. And then I think it was a 6-month documentation period, so it was about 8 months. But that project
Well,
was
3 months plus, was that a 10 months, 8 months, 12 months?
As I was saying it out loud, it sounded too much. So
Yeah.
I was editing.
Yeah.
I think the whole process was about 6 to 7 months.
So we didn't have any neighbour hold-ups or anything. And was there any objections to anything anyway, or we didn't need to seek their
right
advice?
Of use. It was right of use. So
Okay,
it was
great.
easy in that perspective.
Excellent. Well, because from your experience, if you starting to add in require neighbours' permission and things like that then turns into double, doesn't it? At least 6 months turns into 12 months. Is that fair?
I mean, it depends on how aggressive the client wants to be with the next door neighbours. We use the absorb. We can fast track that process in terms of going through council by early engagement with the neighbours.
Yeah.
And
that's using the shovel in a different way. Is that what you're saying?
No, we never do that.
Yeah.
Shovel balls of champagne.
Yeah,
or something
that's
like
right.
that, or cash.
Yeah.
There's ways of compressing it, but going into planning does take more time. But it depends on how aggressive you want to be.
Does that also include the builder, like getting quotes and selecting a builder?
It changes on every project, but generally we like to bring builders in if the client's got a preferred builder, which they did with Leone. Leone's an amazing builder, incredibly high quality work.
That half the okay, like you'll take some credit, I'll try and take some credit. The Energizer Bunny will take some credit, but I think the builder has to take a fair bit of credit for the end result on that property. It was pretty special.
Yeah. I think early engagement with the builder really helps in terms of focusing down your price, and we involved them early and agreed to a fixed rate to do a pre-assessment of the costs. And then we moved on from that perspective, and that helped us with documentation to make sure that what we were planning to do was closely more aligned with the budget. And that,
speaking of budget, just asking that, I'm sorry if I'm jumping in, so we're there. So budget, was that established? Did the Energizer Bunny say straight off that we want 5 million's the limit, or was it 4 million the limit, or was it 3 million, or just no idea?
No, there was definitely a budget set at the beginning, and that budget did grow as the requirements sort of grew. So it started.
So it grew from what, 3 to 5, 4 to 5?
I think it grew by $1 million. I think it went from 3 to.
It's not embarrassing because it's not it's not the architect's fault. It's or not even fault. It's just a matter of it's a discovery process. When you're producing something bespoke, I mean, we get the same as well. When we're, how long will it take? Well, if you're just looking for a crappy old apartment, we can find you something in a week. If you want to find a beautiful house, I don't know whether it's going to take 3 months or 12 months. And I imagine it'd be exactly the same in working through that.
Every project's different. Some projects get fast tracked, some projects are a bit drawn out. I think for us as a designers, we've got our eye on the end result, so we'll work with the client to figure out a timing that suits them and suits what they want to achieve.
I think what you brought up there is really, really important, is that you involve the client, obviously, but you involve a builder, a selected builder. The idea of tendering it out to a whole lot of builders, there's some pluses to that, I suppose, if you're producing a concrete box, but if you're producing something bespoke, it is about relationships. And it's really important to be bringing the builder into the fold quite early, and you do need to know who you're dealing with.
Well, I think going to multiple builders can work as well, but it has its own challenges. I don't think there's necessarily a right and wrong way of going. There's just a way of understanding what suits your particular scenario best. I think if you're doing super high-end projects, I think selecting your builder early and working with them to deliver a project has real benefit.
And that's what we're talking about here. When you're talking about something bespoke and high end, you really should be bringing your builder in early. Compromises. We've established, or you've established, how the budgets were sorted out and how they've changed a little bit, and fair enough too. Compromises. Do you feel at any stage you were making any compromises, or the client felt that they were making any compromises? Because that is a pretty substantial budget to build.
Yeah, I don't think there were any compromises. There was definitely sort of once costs were sort of, there were a few items, like I think timber ceilings on the ground floor and polished plaster all that inside, that at the end of the pricing process was seen as not adding enough value. But I think when you walk in the house, you wouldn't consider that to be a compromise. It was more just choices that were made. But I at the end, that they didn't compromise the overall design. So choices were made to deliver a product, a sort of a beautiful home within a certain budget, but they definitely weren't compromises. They were just selections. I think that's the key when you do hire a designer, is you're not really making compromises, because they'll hold the overall vision. I think when a lot of people come in and they don't have a designer, it's really hard not to get overwhelmed by all the little decisions, because when you're doing a big building, there's like 10,000 small decisions, and if you're not experienced in that space, you often get caught up with a little detail, and that's when you start to compromise. Whereas working with a designer, and I think working with an interior designer and an architect is really good, because you've got two people controlling both visions.
Yep.
You just get someone managing your overall concept and making sure that you actually don't compromise, that you work towards something which is what you want.
Yep. What's the process, and how long did it take from when the first shovel went to sort of when the last, they're painting the doorknob and pulling the door shut?
I think that the building process was, I think it was 19 months. It went slow. It went a little bit over, and I think it's because we were during that heavy rain period. There was a flood which slowed us. It was unseasonal rain, and something hadn't been done. It wasn't the builder's fault. It was 19 months. It was a 19-month build.
Yep.
And there were a few changes that were made on the way, but I think at that level that's pretty normal. And I think then if you've got a good relationship with the builder, you can do that. That's one of about engaging a builder who sort of understands your values, and is aligned with who you are. You can change things as you go and not necessarily blow the budget all the time. It is really hard, because I think everyone, especially when it comes to their home, they want the world, and sometimes it's really hard to get in a position where you can't afford that, and you sort of sitting there going, I spent $4 million, why can't I have that thing?
Why can't I have everything?
It's really hard, but I think that you've got a designer and a good builder, you're really controlling that, how the client's feeling.
How does a good relationship between architect, builder and client work?
It sort of varies from project to project. The Energizer Bunny was very involved with the project, with the builder and the project. So it was really it was more like a partnership between all three people. And I think by making sure that everyone was CC'd into emails, and we met regularly, and we took phone calls, that it worked quite well. So there weren't any testy moments. I think the Energizer Bunny made some changes along the way that made things more expensive and more complicated, but I think because they were informed of what those were by the builder, they weren't made in a way where there was a surprise at the end.
What should that relationship look like with the architect?
I think you really need to spend. It's a really interesting question. I think at the end of the day, it is a relationship and a business relationship. It gets very personal. Like, you get to know people quite well in that process. So I think it's important that you find someone, not just that you sort of like, but someone you kind of trust. And
should you go and see the previous work and stuff like that? Is that important or not that important? Because in your case, the Energizer Bunny really hadn't seen that much of your previous work, so he just went on I suppose a referral, a reference, but he also just went on a feeling. That's really his style anyway.
Yeah, I mean, if you're confident to make that type of, if you're the sort of person that makes that type of decision, I think that's fine. But I think going to meeting your architect and spending time with them, you've just got to ask yourself whether this is someone you spend 2.5 years with them. That's actually quite a long relationship to have with one person. So, and it is pretty intense. So I think you need to find someone that you get on with. I think going to visit their studio and seeing the space they work in is good as well too. I think visiting their past projects is good, but often that's not necessarily a reflection of how good they are as an architect. I know lots of architects who are probably better than some of the work that they've done, but meeting the person and seeing what the fit like and seeing what their aspiration is.
So with the vision, I've always been interested in this question. I'm sure I know which way you'll answer it, because that's the correct political way. But is it the client's vision? Is it the architect's vision? Or is it some other vision?
I think you're creating a vision for someone else. So I think you're leading. You're creating something that someone can buy, and they're paying you to develop a vision. I think but it's got to be a vision that fits them. So you're telling them a story. They've got to like that story, and they've got to buy into that sort of story. So it's kind of like you sort of create a vision with them, because if they don't buy into it, they just won't do it. And you don't want to bully someone into something that's not going to fit them. I think that's something for me which is very important, is just intuitively getting people. And I think that architecture doesn't necessarily need to be super logical. Sometimes it's just a feel person. You meet someone, you see the way they dress, you sit in their space, you talk to them, and you start to develop intuitively, understand them. And then when you propose something, your training is, by meeting people and what they're like, the sorts of things that they'll like, and they'll show you Pinterest images, and they'll with this massive tirade of stories and images, and then you have to, from that, come up with a coherent concept which then you can develop into a house or a project. So I guess you lead the vision, but if the client's doesn't buy into that vision, then it's not a valid vision. So it's kind of collective. It's a very vague way of responding.
No. Look, I think that's true to some extent, and I'm not going to ask you the cost questions and all those sorts of things, because how long is a piece of string, and how long is that? I mean, I don't see that as being fair. It's a little bit like with us in some ways. I mean, we don't know how long it's going to take. If somebody wants to use your services, and shall I say that they should at least consider, if you want something that's a bit different, if you want something that's a bit special, if you want something that I was absolutely amazed with, and financially, the difference between what the block looked like at the start and what the block looked like at the end, and you've subtracted the building costs in between. Yes, great client in Energizer Bunny, but the design that you brought forward to that very difficult block was sensational, Richard. So if people want to,
I hope I haven't let you down with the advice you gave me. I listened, didn't I? So
nobody ever listens to me, mate. So where should they contact you?
Oh, you can just go to contact us go to our website at info@bbbblight.com, or just call me directly from our website number.
Which is
0407 577 419.
Thank you. Mel James by Cells has been Richard Blight today. Architect's been absolutely fantastic. If we can help you in any way, my number is 0408 107 988. Thanks very much, Richard. It's been really good.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Mel.
See you, mate.